Myles Garrett is definitely Defensive Player of the Year right now. Unlike on the offense where you're trying to figure out who, you got some options. Welcome to Just the Stats, NFL Top 10's for Friday. All right, it is the weekend's coming up. Can't wait. We got some huge games on Sunday. There was a big game last night, Thursday night. Must win, especially for Dallas Cowboys. And unfortunately, they could not pull it off. Actually, they showed a stat more than once on the show of what happens to either team if they lose and their chances of making the playoffs. And for Dallas, 9% if they lost, and they did. And we'll talk about that. And then after the game, we'll spend some time looking at some top 10 players this season for their team or the NFL and check those players out, see what kind of numbers some players are doing this season, who's our possible MVPs for this year. And there's a couple, but with 5 games to go, I think it's still open. So we'll talk about that. So we'll get started. And we'll start off with a game. Like I said, Dallas Cowboys were visiting the Detroit Lions. And honestly, the Lions just were hard to stop. Gibbs is amazing. Even Montgomery had a good game. And Goff did okay. And so Detroit Lions pulled off a 44-30 win. And Dallas Cowboys, though their defense had really improved over the last 3 weeks, and they talked a lot about Quinnen Williams. They even interviewed him. The network did before the game, and how with him on the team, how it improved. Well, they couldn't stop Detroit. I mean, now Montgomery only had 60 yards and Gibbs had 43, but 22 carries for 109 yards. So basically 4 yards, more than 4 yards a carry there. But Montgomery had a 35-yard run and broke some tackles. A guy had him by his shirt and was trying to pull him down. He pulled away and was able to score. And Gibbs, wow, he looked more impressive actually catching the ball. I mean, he was 12 for 43, so he didn't even average 4 yards carry, but he had 3 rushing touchdowns, and Montgomery had 4 rushing touchdowns, which is probably what hurt Jared Goff's stats. He had 1 passing touchdown. But Gibbs, 43 yards rushing, but he had 77 yards receiving. So he still had 120 yards of offense. Not bad. And then Montgomery had 60 yards rushing, so he actually outrushed Gibbs on half the carry, 6 carries, 60 yards, and a touchdown. And then he threw in 1 catch for 13 yards, so he had 73 yards. But those two really did well in this game. And then St. Brown did well as well, 6 catches for 92 yards. And Jamison Williams showed up, 7 catches for 96 yards. So they really had the ball spread around. I mean, you had Williams and Brown and Gibbs all having 6 or 7 catches. Those were, well, by far, no one else had more than 2 catches in the game. Jared Goff, 25 for 34, 309 yards, 1 touchdown, no interceptions, and was only sacked 1 time. Though a couple of times they almost got to him. Now, on the other hand, Detroit did get to Dak Prescott, sacked him 5 times for 50 yards, intercepted him twice. That really hurt their team. Plus, there was 1 call which seemed incredibly bad, but, that happens. But Dak Prescott, 31 completions on 47 attempts, 376 yards, and 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions. So already, unlike last week, where there was hardly anybody even threw for 300 yards, this is Thursday night, and we've already got 2 people. That probably sounds better now. But we already have 2 players over 300 yards. So hopefully it's a good start to a highly offensive in a positive way. I'm saying that, where the offenses just shine this week, and we see some high scoring games, a lot of points out there, and a lot of good performances by different offensive players. But we'll see. For Dallas, Javonte Williams, 17 carries, 67 yards, and a touchdown. Now, CeeDee Lamb, 6 catches, 121 yards on 8 targets, but he left the game. I guess, what was that? Maybe early in the third quarter, and didn't play the rest of the game. So he could have had a lot more than that. George Pickens, and they commented after the game, but George Pickens, 5 catches, 37 yards, 9 on 9 targets. What was that? I forgot the guy's name on the show, but he was one of the guys. He used to play. He was really good for Seattle as a defensive player, but he was talking about Pickens, and he just seemed to feel that Pickens was out there not even making much of an effort. And if that's the case, that's just amazing. You've got a team that was trying to fight to get into the playoffs, and they need to win every game. And here you've got a player that's deciding that tonight, on Thursday night football with everybody watching, that he's just going to not really put out a lot of effort. And they showed some of the highlights, and, it gives that type of an appearance. I really don't understand it, but, Pickens has been kind of a touchy guy in Pittsburgh. That's why they were willing to get rid of him, and we'll see. But CeeDee Lamb did well. So Ryan Flournoy came out with 9 catches, 115 yards. So he really was the guy after CeeDee Lamb left. He had 1 touchdown as well, and that tried to help out the team. But really, whatever Dallas did, they would score, and they just could not stop Detroit from scoring again. And Dallas pulled within 7. They were losing 20-9 at halftime, pulled within 10 and then 7. And then just could not keep the pace as Detroit kept passing and having wide open players. Now, for Dallas, the Brandon Aubrey kept them in the game, had a 63-yarder, had 5 field goals on 5 attempts, had a couple more over 50. He really can kick the ball well. And, everybody talked about him having setting the record for the longest field goal. Well, Cam Little for the Jaguars did it, but it's not to say that if Aubrey had the opportunity to kick a 68-yarder, which is the record now, or maybe even 70, if he had the opportunity, it's not to say he wouldn't make it. And we'll look at these field goals in a little bit here, but the longest ones this season, I mean, almost all of them are over 60 yards. Already this season, that many field goals that have 60-plus yards. So who knows how many different guys could maybe kick at 68 yards if they had the right opportunity. All right, so Detroit wins. They're 8-5. Dallas Cowboys now are 6-1. And according to what they showed on TV, they're 9% chance to make the playoffs now. They'd have to have so many different things happen. For Detroit, now they're only up to 55%, so they have to keep winning. I mean, a little bit better chance than even, but still, there's a lot of work for them to make the playoffs. All right, now let's look at some numbers in this game. Now, Jared Goff did have 1 touchdown pass, which is what he needed to move into the top 10 all-time for passing touchdowns for the Detroit Lions. So he got 1. He now has 26, so he's tied for 9th with Matthew Stafford, who did it in 2017, and Bobby Lane, who did it in 1951. They both had 26 as well. So now Jared Goff has 26 passing touchdowns. Now his personal record for the Detroit Lions is 37, which he did last year. So he needs 11 more to get that. Matthew Stafford holds the record for the Detroit Lions with 41, and yesterday I mentioned that I was talking about the Rams. Matthew Stafford holds the record there as well with 41 passing touchdowns. So kind of interesting. All right. Now, also in this game, Jahmyr Gibbs was trying to get into the top 10. He needed 1 rushing touchdown to get into the top 10 to tie Barry Sanders, who did it 3 times, which was 11 rushing touchdowns. So Jahmyr Gibbs came into the game with 10. He needed 1 to tie, 2 to pass him. Well, he did even better than that. He got 3 rushing touchdowns. So Jahmyr Gibbs jumped from 11th spot, really it was 13th because of all those that Barry Sanders had, all the way up to 5th, a tie for 5th with 13 rushing touchdowns. So Jahmyr Gibbs now with 13 rushing touchdowns is the 5th best Detroit Lions in that category. Next up for him is Barry Sanders, who has 14. And Jamal Williams holds the record with 17, which he did in 2022. Now, Jahmyr Gibbs last year had 16, so he's on pace to break his own record and maybe catch Jamal Williams as well. He really had a good game. The rushing yards didn't look that good, and Dallas did a good job to some degree, but except for that big run that Montgomery had. But, man, in the passing game, Gibbs was impressive as well. All right, that's a look at that game. Like I said, a pretty good game to watch. It was fun, entertaining, and Dallas kept making it a game and kept it interesting. But Detroit Lions end up winning 44-30. Now, let's look at some season leaders, and we'll start with receptions. If you're interested in the quarterbacks or running backs, we talked about them yesterday on yesterday's podcast, so you can watch that on Just the Stats NFL on YouTube or listen to it wherever you might listen. But the season leaders in receptions right now, Trey McBride has jumped into the lead. Last week it was Christian McCaffrey, the running back, and then Trey McBride, now tight end, is leading the NFL with 88 receptions because he had 8 more just this last week. Jamar Chase is now back in the hunt. He has 86 along with Puka Nacua. Jamar Chase would be leading this category if he had not been suspended that one game. I mean, it was stupid on his part what he did, but he would definitely be leading, and I don't even doubt that by the end of the season he is the leading receiver. Now, Christian McCaffrey, only running back on this list, is 4th with 85 receptions. Those are your top 4. Jackson Smith-Njigba rounds out the players with more than 75. He has 82. There's a big gap between the 5th and 6th place spot, counting Amon-Ra St. Brown is 6th with 75, but that's not counting Thursday night game. We'll talk about wherever he ends up next week because we'll see what everybody does. He had 6 catches, so he's definitely going to probably move up maybe, or depending on what everybody else does around him. All right, now as far as yards go receiving, this is Jackson Smith-Njigba, despite the fact that he only had like 23 yards last week. By far, not even close, just by far his worst game of the season. And I mentioned it, pretty much everybody is going to have a game like that. You just aren't going to have 100-yard games every week normally. There's always a game that's a dud. So hopefully if you're a fan of Smith-Njigba and the Seahawks, that last week was his dud because they won the game easily. That was the other reason he had such a bad game. The Minnesota Vikings put up no fight, and the Seahawks really didn't have to throw the ball. But Jackson Smith-Njigba now has 1,336 yards to lead the NFL by quite a bit over George Pickens, who had 1,142 and is not going to probably do any better because he didn't have a good game at all. So he'll probably even drop more ground on Smith-Njigba because I'm expecting Jackson to have a much better game and put some more distance between himself and everybody else. But Jackson Smith-Njigba is still well over 100 yards a game receiving. I mean, he's played 12 games and he's got over 1,300 yards. So he's really on a really good pace still, despite such a minuscule output last week. So George Pickens is 2nd with 1,142, and Puka Nacua is 3rd with 1,019. Those are your top 4 or top 3 wide receivers, the only ones over 1,000 yards on this list. Now, I'm sure Jamar Chase, who's in 4th only needs 29 yards to hit the 1,000-yard mark, so he'll probably make it. And nobody else, I mean, he's the only other one even over 900 yards. So anybody else to make 1,000 yards is going to have a 100-plus yards in their next game. Now, Christian McCaffrey, still on this list. He's number 10 with 806 yards receiving. And I mentioned that as I did yesterday because he's in the top 10 rushing as well. All right, now looking at receiving touchdowns, this is Davante Adams with a gigantic lead over Amon-Ra St. Brown, who has 9. And St. Brown didn't have any this yesterday, so Adams, 14 receiving touchdowns. He's on such a good pace right now to make it into the top 10 in the NFL all time, possibly, and also to break the Rams record of most touchdowns receiving in a season. But he's the only one over 10. And then you have, like I said, St. Brown at 9, Pickens at 8. He didn't have any. And Trey McBride at 8. Those are the only other players with 8 or more. And there's a slew of players with 7. So this is all Davante Adams. I'm always interested in these categories where one player is just far and away the best. So, which is what you have with Smith and Jigba in the yardage, Davante Adams in the touchdown receptions. Those two players are that way. And then you have the same thing when you're talking about running backs who catch the ball. So receptions by running backs. This is Christian McCaffrey by 31 receptions. He's got the lead over Devon Achane. McCaffrey right now has 85 receptions after week 13. Devon Achane and Bijan Robinson both have 54. Those are the next two. And then Jahmyr Gibbs is the only other one over 50. He has 51. And he had a good game. I think, what did I say? I think he had 7 catches. So he'll jump up for sure, depending on what these other players do around him. But they're the only players with more than 50. And Christian McCaffrey has 85. I mean, down at the bottom of the list in 10th is Alvin Kamara. So Christian McCaffrey has double him. Just a very impressive season for Christian McCaffrey. He's one of the MVP candidates in my eyes. I mean, the 49ers have a good record between him and Stafford, maybe May. And I would have counted Jackson Smith and Jigba, but that game really last week did throw him off. So he's going to have a couple of big games to maybe push himself up there as somebody of interest. And even I had Jonathan Taylor, but the last couple of weeks, his numbers have started to drop off as well. So in the receiving yards by running backs, Christian McCaffrey obviously leads this category. 806 yards he's got receiving as a running back. Bijan Robinson has 594. He's second. And then Jahmyr Gibbs has 394. So again, you have Bijan Robinson over 200 yards behind Christian McCaffrey as far as receiving yards. I mean, Christian McCaffrey's on a pace, if he can keep it up, and this is why I think he could be an MVP, of having 1,000 yards rushing and 1,000 yards receiving. I mean, he's got what? He's got 4 games to go, so he's going to have to average about 50 yards in each thing per game to do it, but which is definitely not out of the realm of possibility to hit 1,000 yards rushing and receiving. All right, now yards from scrimmage, and again, this is where he leads the category, but not by a ton, but he does lead the category of yards from scrimmage. Christian McCaffrey's first with 1,655 yards. Now, Jonathan Taylor was first, and then he was second, and then after 2 weeks ago, and now after last week, he's dropped to third. By only 3 yards behind Bijan Robinson, who has 1,589, and then Jonathan Taylor has 1,586. They're the only players over 1,500 yards. And as I said, Christian McCaffrey has a smaller lead over Robinson, primarily because Robinson has more rushing yards. He's almost got 1,000 already. But there is a difference of 56 yards between the two of them right now. And then Jonathan Taylor is also not far behind. So Robinson, Taylor have big games and Christian McCaffrey doesn't, you could see another shakeup up here among those. Now, everybody on this list is running backs except for Jackson Smith and Jigba, who was near the top, but with only 23 yards last week, it dropped him way down, all the way down to 7th. But there is almost a 200-yard gap between 7th and 8th place on the yards from scrimmage. Kind of interesting that you have 7 players are kind of standing out, and then after that, there's a drop. George Pickens was 10th as the only other wide receiver on this list, but I have a feeling after last night, he'll probably drop out of the top 10 and we'll see somebody else after this week's games. So, man, Christian McCaffrey's just been impressive. Held that team together, especially, everybody knows he was getting the ball when, you didn't have Kittle, you didn't have any good receivers really. You knew McCaffrey was going to get it, and he still was getting the yards. All right, longest field goal. Well, this is Cam Little, set the NFL record earlier this year with 68-yarder. And as I was saying, then you have Chase McLaughlin, who kicked a 65-yarder. And then Brandon Aubrey earlier this season had a 64-yarder, and then last night he had a 63-yarder. So now him and Evan McPherson both have kicked 63-yard field goals this season. Real Reichard for the Vikings had a 62-yarder. And then Lucas Havrizik for the Packers had a 61-yarder. And finally, Chris Boswell had a 60-yarder. So 8 of the top 10s are 60-plus yards, which is just incredible. Not too long ago, the record was 63 yards, and already we've had 3 people break that record, if that had been the record, and 2 more tie it just this year alone. And then rounding it out, you had 3 players who have kicked a 59-yarder. So the field goals, and, he talked about it in the game, these 50-yarders now are just ho-hum. You're almost expected, like, how can you miss a 50-yarder? It's only 50 yards. But back in the day, there would be hesitation to even kick a 50-yarder. 10 years ago, you debate whether you really should kick a 50-yarder, 50-plus yarder, or just punt. Nowadays, you're talking about whether to punt when you're at 60 yards, not 50 yards. It's just amazing the distance these guys have. And like I said, despite Cam Little holding the record with 68-yarder, I think obviously Brandon Aubrey could do it. Chase McLaughlin kicks a 65-yarder. Now that one just scraped over. It would not have made 68 yards. Cam Little's would have made 70, actually. But I think Brandon Aubrey would definitely make a 68-yarder as well. But for Cam Little, it just worked out perfectly. It was the end of the first half. They got the ball close enough for him to give it a shot. It was only 1 or 2 seconds on the clock, so it was like a perfect scenario to try it, and he made it. But these field goal kickers are amazing. All right. Well, again, we're going to talk about tackles. And when I say again, because this is another player who stands out among everybody else right now as far as tackles go. And I don't talk about tackles, too many defensive players all the time, but Jordan Brooks for the Dolphins has 137 tackles. Second is Bobby Wagner with 115. He plays for the Commanders. So you're talking about a jump of 22 tackles between first and second, because after that, you have 2 more players, Devin White for the Raiders and Cedric Gray for the Titans, who have 114. Demario Davis for the Saints has 111. So you get my point that after number 1, there's a big gap. And then after that, between 10th spot and second spot, there's 15 difference in tackles. Whereas from first to second, there's a 22 difference in the amount of tackles. So it just, for me, saying Jordan Brooks is standing out right now as far as tackles go. Now, I say that because it is impressive, but it's not as impressive as Myles Garrett, who for tackles for loss right now has 28. And I had mentioned mistakenly that Max Crosby was leading the NFL in tackles for loss. Well, he's second with 23, but he's not first. But those two players, the only ones over 20 tackles for loss, and Max Crosby has 23, Myles Garrett has 28 already. 28. And I'll show you that if you're watching this, or I'll tell you as well, but that is an impressive number, 28 already, with still what Cleveland has 5 games to go. So he has a chance. I don't know if he can break the record, but he's going to definitely come into second spot for sure. Brian Burns is third with 18. Impressive, and then it's just down from there. But 28, Garrett, Max Crosby has 23. And then to show how dominant Myles Garrett has been, first let me tell you this about the tackles for loss. So the record, which is an amazing record by J.J. Watt, in 2012 had 39 tackles for loss. Now, I say that's impressive because he also holds the second and third spot, which he did in 2014 and 2015 with 29. So from first to second, there's a 10 tackles for loss difference. He had this one crazy season, outlandishly good, where he had 39 tackles for loss. The next best he owns with 29. That's a major gap. And when you look at the records, he's got the second. He's in second with 29. In 10th is Michael Strahan with 24. So there's a 5 tackles for loss difference between second and 10th, but there's a 10 tackle loss between first and second. So now here comes Myles Garrett, who's already got 28. So he's in fourth all time in tackles for loss in the NFL with 28 tackles for loss. Next up is J.J. Watt, who has twice did it with 29. So I fully expect him to catch J.J. Watt and move into second and break this domination that J.J. Watt has had at the top 3 spots. He only needs 1 to tie, 2 to any. He's such a pace right now. He's averaging better than 2 a game right now. So you expect him to hit 30. No one else has hit 30 but J.J. Watt. So Myles Garrett is definitely Defensive Player of the Year right now. Unlike on the offense where you're trying to figure out who, you got some options. There's nobody right now that's giving any challenge to Myles Garrett as far as that goes. Now with 23, as I mentioned, that Max Crosby has, which is very good. He's only 1 away from getting into the top 10 all-time in tackles for loss. So he could also pop up onto this list this year. We'll see. Now this season alone, Myles Garrett in sacks leads the NFL with 19. Brian Burns is second with 13. 6 tackles difference between first and second. So Brian Burns having a good season, his tackles for loss and sacks, but nothing compared to Myles Garrett's numbers. Micah Parsons is third with 12.5. You've only got 9 players with 10 or more sacks right now this season. And Myles Garrett almost has that doubled with 19. So quite an impressive season so far for Myles Garrett, making a case that he's dominating the NFL on defense, and he'll be the NFL Defensive Player of the Year for sure. Who knows? I don't know if he could be the MVP of the NFL. I don't know if I'd have to look it up if a defensive player has ever done that, but we'll see. All right, that's a look at some numbers. Some big numbers there, interesting ones. Like I said, can't wait for the games on Sunday. We've got some huge games coming up, games where teams are trying to survive in the NFL, as far as the playoffs coming up. I mean, Atlanta's still trying to hang in there, but they play Seattle. So Seattle's trying to stay close with the Rams for first place. Cincinnati's got a chance because how bad Baltimore and Pittsburgh are to stay in there, but they play Buffalo. And Buffalo needs to win as well to even stay. They're a wild card team. They're a 7th wild card spot, so they need to win. So that's a must win for both teams. Looking down, then you have some that aren't as big. Tampa Bay needs to win over New Orleans to stay ahead of the Carolina Panthers, who are on a bye. So if they don't win, they'd be in a deadlock in first place. Obviously, the Indianapolis-Jacksonville game, they're both 8-4. So whoever comes out of that game, the winner, will be in first place. Then you have Pittsburgh, Baltimore. They're tied for first as well. So somebody's going to drop out of first place there. Baltimore holds it, but they have the same record. So we'll see who ends up first there. Chicago, Green Bay. Chicago's in first, but Green Bay wins that game. They move into first place. So another big game there. And then Houston, Kansas City. Obviously a must win for both of those teams. They're both trying to make it as a wild card. Kansas City's almost out of it, 6-6. They have to win. And Houston obviously has to win to stay in the playoff race as well. So, man, a bunch of big games. And then on Monday night, Philadelphia Eagles and the Los Angeles Chargers. Both of those teams are trying to stay in there. Now, Philadelphia, with Dallas losing, it's not as important to them anymore. I mean, obviously you want to win, but the pressure is not on them like it is on some of these other games. But it is on the Chargers. They're a wild card team right now, and they need to win to stay in the hunt. So a lot of big games. All right. Appreciate you listening. And please like and subscribe. You can watch this podcast on YouTube at Just the Stats NFL, and you'll see the stats that I was talking about. All the top 10 players, not just the ones I talked about, but the entire top 10 list. If you want to look at those, you can go to the podcast and watch it. Also, you can obviously listen to this podcast on YouTube or Spotify, Apple, or whatever app you might use. Please like and subscribe and comment. If you got any comments, I'll try to get to those as soon as I see them. And again, appreciate you listening. So for this episode of NFL Top 10s for Friday, I am out. Enjoy your weekend.